Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating aspects of World War II, the moments where everything hung in the balance. The decisions, the mistakes, the what-ifs that could have completely rewritten history as we know it. We often look at World War II as this inevitable march of events, but the truth is far more complicated. Behind every major battle, there were plans that almost worked, intelligence that was ignored, and split-second decisions that changed the fate of millions. And spoiler alert, some of these stories are absolutely wild. So grab your coffee, settle in, because we're about to explore 6 incredible stories that could have changed the entire course of World War II. From stolen German plans to secret nuclear programs, from failed assassinations to ghost armies that existed only on paper, this is history at its most dramatic. Let's get into it.
Operation Citadel, the lost German plans. Picture this, it's spring 1943. The Germans are planning the largest tank offensive in history. Code name, Operation Citadel. The target? A massive bulge in the Soviet lines near Kursk. If successful, this operation could turn the tide of the entire Eastern Front. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Germans had learned from their mistakes. They were bringing everything. Over 780,000 troops, nearly 3,000 tanks, including the brand new Panthers and Tigers, and over 2,000 aircraft. This wasn't just an attack. This was supposed to be a knockout punch. But there was one tiny problem. I mean really tiny. Like fitting in a briefcase tiny. On April 13th, 1943, a German courier aircraft carrying detailed operational plans for Citadel crashed near Soviet lines. The briefcase containing these plans was recovered by Soviet forces. Now, you might think, okay, that's bad, but surely they had encrypted the documents, right? Well, let me put it this way. The Germans had about as much luck with operational security as they did with invading Russia in winter. Which is to say, not great. The Soviets now knew exactly where, when, and how the Germans planned to attack. But here's the brilliant part. They didn't just prepare defenses. They went absolutely overboard. Under Marshal Georgy Zhukov's direction, the Soviets created what can only be described as a defensive fortress of nightmares. They dug 8 separate defensive lines. 8. That's not defense in depth. That's defense, and we're going to make your regret every minute. They laid over 400,000 lines. And yes, someone had to count those. They positioned over 20,000 artillery pieces. To put that in perspective, that's more artillery than most countries have bullets. But wait, it gets better. The Soviets also knew the exact timing of the German attack. So on July 5th, 1943, just hours before the Germans were set to launch their massive artillery barrage, the Soviets fired first. Imagine being a German soldier, all pumped up for your big offensive, and suddenly the enemy hits you with a preemptive artillery strike. Talk about spoiling the surprise party. When Operation Citadel finally began, it was less of a breakthrough and more of a very expensive, very deadly slog. The German advance measured in single-digit kilometers per day. Those fancy new Panther tanks, many broke down from mechanical issues before they even saw combat. The Tigers were fearsome, sure, but there weren't enough of them, and the Soviets had prepared specifically for them. The Battle of Kursk lasted from July 5th to August 23rd, 1943, and it became the largest tank battle in history. The Germans lost approximately 200,000 men, around 1,500 tanks, and over 1,000 aircraft. The Soviets suffered heavier casualties. War on the Eastern Front was brutal, but they could replace their losses. Germany couldn't. After Kursk, the Germans never launched another major offensive on the Eastern Front. They were now permanently on the defensive, all because someone left important documents on a plane that went down in the wrong place. The lesson here? In war, keeping your plans secret is just as important as making good plans. And maybe, just maybe, don't fly your top secret invasion plans over enemy territory. Just a thought. Japan's secret nuclear program. Now let's talk about something that sounds like it came straight out of an alternate history novel. Japan's nuclear weapons program. Yes, you heard that right. While everyone knows about the Manhattan Project, very few people realize that Japan was also racing to build an atomic bomb during World War II. The program actually had two separate projects. The Army was running one program called NIGO under physicist Yoshio Nishina, while the Navy had their own program called FGO under Bunsen Arakazu. Because nothing says efficient wartime research like having two competing military branches working on the same secret weapon, right? Nishina was no slouch scientifically. He had actually studied under Niels Bohr in Copenhagen and was one of the leading physicists in Japan. By 1941, the Japanese army tasked him with investigating the feasibility of an atomic bomb. His conclusion? Possible, but incredibly difficult. The major problem Japan faced was resources. Building an atomic bomb requires massive amounts of enriched uranium. To enrich uranium, you need thousands of specialized centrifuges or gaseous diffusion equipment, plus enormous amounts of electricity. The United States had entire cities dedicated to this purpose. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for instance, which at one point was consuming more electricity than New York City. Japan, meanwhile, was an island nation fighting a war on multiple fronts, facing increasing submarine attacks that were strangling their supply lines. They were running short on everything from oil to steel to rice. Asking them to divert massive resources to a theoretical superweapon was like asking someone drowning to focus on their synchronized swimming technique. But here's what's fascinating. They actually made some progress. Nishina's team successfully built cyclotrons, particle accelerators needed for nuclear research. They conducted uranium enrichment experiments. By 1945, they had managed to produce small amounts of enriched uranium. Very small amounts. We're talking grams, not kilograms. Then came the American bombing campaign. In April 1945, a B-29 bombing raid destroyed Nishina's laboratory in Tokyo, including his cyclotron. After the war ended, American occupation forces found another cyclotron and, in a move that upset many scientists, dismantled it and dumped it in Tokyo Bay. Apparently, they weren't taking any chances. Here's the million-dollar question. Could Japan have actually built a nuclear weapon if they had more time and resources? The scientific consensus is extremely unlikely. Even if the war had continued, Japan was years away from having enough enriched uranium for even a single bomb. The Manhattan Project employed over 130,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion. That's about $30 billion in today's money. Japan simply didn't have those resources, especially not while fighting a losing war. But imagine if they had started earlier. Imagine if Japan had prioritized this research in 1937, before the war escalated. Imagine if they hadn't had to compete with immediate military needs for resources. The Pacific War could have taken a very, very different turn. Instead, Japan became the only nation to experience nuclear warfare firsthand. A tragic irony, given that they were also trying to develop the same weapon. War has a dark sense of humor sometimes. The bomb that failed to kill Rommel. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, one of Germany's most celebrated commanders, known for his tactical brilliance in North Africa. By 1944, he was commanding Army Group B in northern France, overseeing the Atlantic Wall defenses. And here's the thing about Rommel. He was starting to have some serious doubts about the whole fighting for Hitler thing. After the successful Allied invasion at Normandy, Rommel became convinced that Germany had lost the war. He was involved in discussions with other German officers about removing Hitler from power. Not quite a full conspirator in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, but definitely circling those waters. He wanted to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies, which would have fundamentally changed the end of the war. Now, the British had no idea about any of this. What they did know was that Rommel was a military genius who had given them headaches in North Africa, and now he was organizing the defense of France. From the British perspective, the equation was simple. No Rommel equals easier invasion equals saved Allied lives. So they came up with Operation Gap. The plan was beautifully simple in that incredibly dangerous special operations kind of way. A small team of SAS, Special Air Service, commandos would parachute into France, locate Rommel's headquarters, and kill him. Quick, surgical, effective. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. The operation was scheduled for the night of July 13th to 14th, 1944. A team of 6 SAS soldiers, led by Captain John Tonkin, parachuted into Normandy. Their intelligence said Rommel's headquarters was at Chateau de la Rochegain. The team landed successfully, which is always a good start. Then things got complicated. First, they had to navigate through territory that was now an active war zone. Second, they discovered that Rommel's exact location and schedule were harder to pin down than expected. The man was constantly moving, inspecting defenses, rarely sleeping in the same place twice. He was like a very dangerous, very German game of whack-a-mole. Then, on July 17, 1944, before the SAS team could locate Rommel, something else happened. Rommel was driving on a road near Saint-Foy de Montgomery when British Spitfires strafed his car. His driver was killed, the car crashed, and Rommel suffered severe head injuries, a fractured skull, and several facial injuries. The irony is almost poetic. The British spent weeks planning a sophisticated assassination operation and then accidentally nearly killed him in a random air attack. It's like preparing an elaborate heist only to find out someone left the door unlocked. Rommel survived, but was out of action. He was sent back to Germany to recover. And here's where history gets really interesting. While recovering at his home in Herlingen, Rommel was implicated in the July 20th plot to kill Hitler. Whether he was actually involved remains debated by historians, but the Nazi leadership had decided he was guilty. On October 14, 1944, 2 generals arrived at Rommel's home. They gave him a choice: face a public trial for treason, which would result in his execution and persecution of his family, or take poison and be given a state funeral with his family protected. Rommel chose the poison, so in the end, the British didn't kill Rommel. A random air attack didn't kill Rommel. Hitler's own regime killed Rommel. But here's the alternate history question. What if Operation Gaff had succeeded? What if the British had killed Rommel in July 1944? Would Germany have lost a brilliant defensive commander? Absolutely. Would it have shortened the war? Maybe by a few weeks. But here's the twist. If the British had successfully assassinated Rommel before the July 20th plot, he would have died as a Nazi martyr, not as a disillusioned general. His reputation would have remained untarnished. His complicated legacy, brilliant commander, yes, but also someone who served a monstrous regime and only turned against it when defeat was obvious, would be completely different. Sometimes the bombs that fail change history more than the ones that succeed. Soviet ghost armies and deception tactics. Let's talk about one of the most brilliant and honestly coolest aspects of World War II, military deception. And nobody, I mean nobody, did it better than the Soviets. They turned lying into an art form. I mean that as a compliment. The concept is called maskirovka, which is Russian for masking or camouflage, but it means so much more than just painting your tanks green. It's a comprehensive doctrine of military deception that includes concealment, imitation, disinformation, and misdirection. Basically, it's military-grade magic tricks. Here's how it worked on a massive scale. Before major operations, the Soviets would create entire fake armies. And I don't mean a few dummy tanks. I mean whole divisions that existed only as props, radio transmissions, and elaborate theater. They'd build fake airfields with wooden planes. They'd create dummy tank formations using plywood and canvas stretched over wooden frames. From German reconnaissance aircraft, these looked completely real. They'd set up radio networks where operators would send fake messages back and forth, creating electronic signatures of entire army units that didn't exist. But here's the genius part. They didn't just create fake armies. They would hide their real armies using the exact opposite techniques. Real tanks would be disguised as trucks under camouflage netting. Real airfields would be made to look abandoned. Entire mechanized corps would move only at night, with strict radio silence, leaving no trace. One of the best examples of this was Operation Bagration in June 1944, the Soviet offensive that destroyed German Army Group Center. The Germans knew an offensive was coming. You can't hide preparations involving millions of men, but they had no idea where the main blow would fall. The Soviets conducted an elaborate deception operation called Operation Bodyguard. Wait, no, that was the Allied operation for D-Day. The Soviets called theirs, actually, I don't think they gave a fancy name. They were too busy actually implementing it to worry about branding. They created fake concentrations of troops in the south, suggesting the offensive would come there. German intelligence bought it completely. They moved their reserves south. Meanwhile, the real Soviet forces were massing in Belarus, in the center. Over 1.2 million men for 1,000 tanks and 24,000 artillery pieces, somehow concealed through a combination of camouflage, night movements, and aggressive counterintelligence. When the offensive launched on June 23, 1944, the Germans were caught completely off guard. In just 5 weeks, the Soviets destroyed 28 German divisions and advanced nearly 400 miles. It was one of the most successful operations in the entire war, and deception played a crucial role. The Soviets also used deception defensively. Remember Kursk? Not only did they know about the German attack from those recovered plans, but they also created multiple defensive positions, many of which were fake or secondary. The Germans would break through what they thought was the main defensive line, only to find another one behind it, and another, and another. It was like those Russian nesting dolls, except instead of cute painted wood, it was anti-tank mines and artillery. Even individual units got created. Soviet commanders would sometimes have their tank units drive in circles behind hills, kicking up dust, making it look like they had far more vehicles than they actually did. Simple, low-tech, effective. The Germans weren't slouches at deception, but they were often working with fewer resources and, by mid-war, against an enemy that had learned to be very suspicious. The Soviets, meanwhile, perfected deception into a core military doctrine. After the war, these tactics became foundational to Soviet military doctrine throughout the Cold War. That whole thing during the 1980s where NATO was constantly worried about hidden Soviet tank armies? Yeah, that paranoia came from World War II, where the Soviets proved they could hide an entire front-level operation. The lesson? In war, what your enemy thinks you're doing is just as important as what you're actually doing. And if you can make them prepare for a ghost army while your real army sneaks up behind them, well, that's just good strategy. Hitler's plan to destroy Moscow, Generalplan Ost. Okay, folks, content warning here. This section deals with some genuinely dark stuff. We're talking about Nazi ideology and genocidal planning. It's historically important, but it's not pleasant. If you need to skip ahead, I understand. Timestamp in the description. Generalplan Ost, the general plan for the East, was arguably the most horrifying document of World War II, and that's saying something. It wasn't a battle plan. It was a blueprint for genocide and colonization on a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. The plan, developed by the Nazi SS and various Reich ministries between 1939 and 1942, called for the systematic depopulation of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. We're talking about the displacement, enslavement, and murder of tens of millions of people. The goal was to create living space, Lebensraum, for German settlers. According to the plan, after defeating the Soviet Union, the Nazis would reduce the population of major cities to almost nothing. Moscow, specifically, was to be completely depopulated and then destroyed. Not captured and occupied, destroyed. The plan called for flooding the city by damming the Moscow River, turning it into an artificial lake. Because apparently, just conquering it wasn't dramatic enough. Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was to suffer a similar fate, starved into submission, depopulated, and then given to Finland or simply erased. The Nazi leadership explicitly stated that they didn't want to feed these populations. They wanted them gone. The agricultural areas of Ukraine and southern Russia were to be colonized by German settlers. The existing population? The plan categorized them into those who could be Germanized, maybe 10 to 15%, those who could be used as slave labor, perhaps another 25%, and the rest would be, well, the plan used the term eliminated or encouraged to die out. We're talking about potentially 30 to 50 million people. Now, Why am I telling you this in a video about decisions that could have changed the war? Because Generalplan Ost wasn't just an abstract policy document. It actually influenced German military strategy in ways that ultimately hurt their war effort. The Wehrmacht, German military, might have been able to win some level of victory, or at least not lose so catastrophically in the Soviet Union if they had treated it purely as a conventional war. Many Soviet citizens in Ukraine and other regions initially viewed the Germans as liberators from Stalin's oppressive regime. The Holodomor, Stalin's forced famine in Ukraine, had killed millions just a few years earlier. There was genuine anti-Soviet sentiment the Germans could have exploited, but the Nazi ideology, as embodied in Generalplan Ost, demanded something else entirely. Wehrmacht orders explicitly called for the elimination of Soviet commissars, harsh treatment of civilians, and the requisitioning of food, even if it meant local starvation. This wasn't just cruelty, it was strategic stupidity. Instead of gaining millions of potential allies, or at least neutral civilians, the Germans created partisans. The Soviet partisan movement became one of the most effective resistance campaigns of the entire war. By 1944, there were estimated to be over 250,000 partisans operating behind German lines, disrupting supply routes, gathering intelligence, and tying down German troops that were desperately needed at the front. Hitler's own generals occasionally pushed back. Some argued for more moderate occupation policies. They were overruled. Hitler insisted that the war in the East was an ideological war of annihilation. And you can't win a conventional military campaign while simultaneously trying to implement genocide and colonization. Well, you can't win it ethically, but also, it turns out you can't win it practically either. The complete failure to implement Generalplan Ost, because, thankfully, Germany lost, represents one of history's near misses with catastrophe. But the attempt to implement it, the atrocities committed in its name, and the strategic errors it caused all contributed to Germany's defeat. The alternate history here isn't what if it succeeded. That's too dark even for speculation. The real question is, what if Hitler had never conceived of these ideological and genocidal plans? What if Germany had fought a purely conventional war? The Soviet Union would have still been formidable, but would the outcome have been different? We can be grateful we never found out. The disaster of Convoy PQ-17. Let's end with a story of one of the most controversial and tragic decisions of the entire war. The scattering of Convoy PQ-17. It's got everything. Brave sailors, terrible weather, Nazi battleships, and a decision made hundreds of miles away that doomed dozens of ships and hundreds of men. First, some context. The Arctic convoys were supply missions from Britain and the United States to the Soviet Union, sailing through some of the most dangerous waters in the world. They had to navigate through the Arctic Ocean, facing storms, ice, extreme cold, and German attacks from submarines, surface ships, and aircraft based in occupied Norway. These sailors were tough, like sailing through frozen hell while being shot at tough. PQ-17 departed from Iceland on June 27, 1942. It was one of the largest convoys yet. 35 merchant ships carrying tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and other supplies crucial to the Soviet war effort. Protecting them were multiple escort vessels, plus a distant covering force that included British battleships. For the first few days, things went relatively well. Sure, they were sailing through the Arctic in summer, which means 24-hour daylight, great for navigation, terrible for hiding from German planes, and yes, they were under constant surveillance by German reconnaissance aircraft, and okay, they were being stalked by U-boats, but nobody had died yet, so by Arctic convoy standards, that's a good day. Then British naval intelligence received reports that the German battleship Tirpitz, sister ship to the famous Bismarck, had left its Norwegian fjord and was heading toward the convoy. Also potentially coming, the pocket battleship Admiral Scheer and the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper. The Tirpitz was a big deal. At 42,000 tons with 15-inch guns, she could obliterate every ship in the convoy, including most of the escorts. The convoy's covering force of British battleships was too far away to help in time. On July 4th, 1942, the British Admiralty made a decision. They ordered the convoy to scatter. The escorts were to withdraw westward at high speed. The merchant ships were on their own, dispersed across the Arctic Ocean. The reasoning was that a scattered convoy would be harder for surface ships to attack. They'd have to chase down individual ships rather than firing into a concentrated target. In theory, this made sense. In practice, it was a disaster. Here's the twist. The Tirpitz never attacked the convoy. She sortied from port, sailed around a bit, and then returned to Norway without engaging. The threat was real, but the actual attack never materialized. But the convoy was now scattered. No protection. Individual ships trying to reach the Soviet ports on their own. What followed was carnage. German U-boats and aircraft had a field day. Without the protection of the convoy's anti-aircraft guns and escort vessels, the merchant ships were sitting ducks. Over the next week, German forces sank 24 of the 35 merchant ships. 153 sailors died. The lost cargo included 430 tanks, 210 aircraft, and 3,350 vehicles, plus thousands of tons of other supplies. Some ships managed to reach Soviet ports by hiding in ice floes or near the polar ice cap, navigating through fog, basically using every trick they could think of. But most weren't so lucky. The survivors were traumatized. The escort crews felt guilty for abandoning them. The decision became immediately controversial. Could the convoy have fought off an attack? Maybe, maybe not. But the certain disaster of scattering proved worse than the possible disaster of staying together. The controversy reached the highest levels. The officer who gave the order to scatter, Admiral Sir Douglas Howe, defended his decision. He argued that the intelligence reports gave him reason to believe an attack was imminent. Critics argued that he panicked, that he didn't trust his convoy commanders to make the right tactical decisions on the spot. Howe died in 1943, still defending the choice. The debate continues among naval historians to this day. For the Arctic convoys, PQ-17 was a turning point. Future convoys received stronger escorts. Procedures were changed. The route was temporarily suspended during the summer months when 24-hour daylight made the convoys too vulnerable. The Soviet Union did eventually receive the supplies they desperately needed through later convoys. But the cost of PQ-17 was unnecessarily high, and it remains a case study in how a decision made with incomplete information under pressure hundreds of miles from the action can turn a difficult situation into a disaster. The lesson? Sometimes the threat of an attack causes more damage than the attack itself. And if you're going to scatter a convoy, maybe make sure the threat is actually there first. So there you have it. 6 decisions, 6 moments where history balanced on a knife's edge. Stolen plans that doomed a German offensive. A nuclear program that never reached fruition. An assassination that failed but led to something else entirely. Ghost armies that won real battles. Genocidal plans that sabotaged military victory, and a convoy scattered in the face of a threat that never came. What strikes me about all of these stories is how much of war comes down to information, timing, and decision-making under pressure. The Germans at Kursk had good plans, but their opponent knew about them. Japan had brilliant scientists, but lacked resources and time. The British had a shot at Rommel, but random chance got there first. The Soviets mastered deception because they invested in it as a strategic priority. The Nazis' ideological goals undermined their military ones. And the Admiralty scattered PQ-17 based on intelligence that turned out to be less urgent than they feared. World War II wasn't predetermined. These moments remind us that history is made by human decisions, with all the uncertainty, pressure, and imperfect information that comes with being human. If you enjoyed this deep dive into World War II history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Drop a comment telling me which story surprised you most, or if there are other World War II decisions you'd like me to cover in a future video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.